The story of the wedding of Cana was always my grandmother's favorite. As she always put it, the first miracle of Jesus, was to give the working man a drink. Now, I do not personally drink very much or very frequently, but her point was never about alcohol any more than the story is about alcohol for the sake of alcohol. Rather, it was about the dignity of all people and the need to be able to live life and not just enjoy. God made our creation good and made us part of that creation. We are meant to appreciate that goodness. And part of that appreciation is celebration of the moments of joy in life, recognition of the dignity of work, and the importance to preserve the dignity of all. If the wine had been allowed to run out, the groomsman and his family would have been humiliated. But also, the festivities would have quickly come to an end. The joy and celebration of not just the groom and his family, but of the community as a whole would have been ended. Now, as we have spoken about earlier, it is important to recognize that the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Luke are distinct and separate from one another. It still speaks to the overall character of Mary, the woman that God chose from all women across the centuries to be the mother to the Son, that in Luke, we have the Magnificat, and in John, we get her cajoling Jesus to fix the wine situation. Mary identified and was in solidarity with the poor and had a profound concern for their dignity. Now, to the best of my knowledge, none of us is gifted with the ability to turn water to wine. But each of us has a gift, and each of those gifts exists for us to build up one another and the world as a whole. Tomorrow, those of us who are government workers and many school children will have the day off in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man who has been recognized as a saint on the Episcopal, Lutheran, and even Orthodox calendars, and a man who, like all of us, was flawed. He was not perfect. He was a human being, and yet he struggled for perfection throughout his very short life. His falls into sinfulness have brought a shadow over his legacy in more recent years, but it was his struggle towards serving God that brought the most criticism when he was alive. Too often today, that struggle has been simplified to being about a fight for the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Further, there is the sense that once the act passed, racism and the impacts of racist policies and laws, including slavery and Jim Crow, but also the discriminatory land use, employment, and access policies, procedures, and laws of individual governments at all levels in the North, disappeared. This whitewashed version of Dr. King has made him much more palatable to celebrate and teach about, especially in predominantly white spaces. But it also ignores the reality of his life as a Baptist minister, someone who spoke eloquently and persuasively in secular spaces, but who was most comfortable in the pulpit. Dr. King is remembered most for his I Have a Dream speech, but two other speeches, ones that he gave in the last months of his life, have always struck me as more poignant. First, there is the mountaintop speech, which he gave the night before he died, as he was reflecting on his work in Memphis supporting the striking garbage and sewer workers. In it, Dr. King uttered the prophetic words, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. It's very much a sermon rather than simply a speech. But it was a sermon, like the Magnificat and like Mary's cajoling of Jesus to do something when the wine ran out, that was in service to the dignity and in solidarity with the working poor. It was a sermon that spoke to the need of these men who picked up garbage and cleaned street receivers and went home tired, achy, and covered in sewage and garbage slime, that they deserved to be treated with respect, paid fair wages, and provided with safe and sanitary working conditions. It was a sermon, and it was given in a church, but it was given as part of a series of speeches in support of striking sanitation workers, not as part of a church service in response to a specific scriptural reading. The second speech the drum major instinct is, however, a true sermon that Dr. King preached at Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church in response to a reading from the Gospel of Mark and the story of James and John jostling for positions amongst the apostles. In it, Dr. King reflected upon the innate human desire to be praised, to feel superior to others, to be special, be first, a desire he called the drum major instinct. And Dr. King posited that when left unchecked, the drum major instinct leads to racism, prejudice, discrimination, war, and even the possibility of nuclear war. And then Dr. King turned back to the scriptures and pointed out that for all the evil that the drum major instinct can produce, ultimately, Jesus did not condemn it or condemn James and John. Rather, Jesus redirected their selfish desire to selflessness. If you want to be first in love, moral excellence, and generosity. In reflecting on these words of Jesus, Dr. King looked to his own funeral and legacy and what he most wanted to be remembered for. And it was not all of the awards, prizes, and academic accomplishments, but rather a life of service, a life of love, a life of striving to live the gospel. I want you to say that the day that I tried to be right on the war question, I want you to be able to say that that day that I did try to feed the hungry. And I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to clothe those who were naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. And that is the life that today's scriptures call us all to strive for. Amen.